Actually, today I'm not feeling like studying, but I just say to myself, I just tell myself that winners are not made on the days, uh, winners are not made on the days where they feel like doing something, working hard, but winners are made on the days where they don't feel like working hard or they don't want to work hard. That's when the champion is made. And if I have to achieve anything great in life, I have to work hard in the right direction and be consistent. So yeah, let's go. Let's go and study in the right. अरे स्ट्रिंग वो यार फंक्शन जिसमें कोई भी वैल्यू दोगे तो उसको स्ट्रिंग में चेंज करोगे पड़ा था। सही हो गया। करना ये था कि वो स्ट्रिंग जो था ना वो उसको नंबर पे करा था, और कभी भी ऐसा कोई फ्लोटिंग नंबर ढूंढ लेते ना तो वो दूर जाने, इसीलिए जब भी हम पैसा वगैरह कैलकुलेट करते हैं तो सबसे पहले फ्लोट में चेंज करते हैं, एडिशन वगैरह जो भी करना होता है वो फ्लोट में कराते हैं, एंड में डिवाइड कर देते हैं 100 से, इससे ये प्रॉब्लम ना है। ओ, ऑन की डाउन।
क्या है यार।
Yeah, क्या हो रहा है? पूरी चढ़ती जमाना है सितारा। ലിപി ലിപി ബില്ലി ബില്ലി എത്രകോരിയേ ഒന്നുന്നെയാണ് തങ്ങോരിയേ blah blah. भाई क्या हो रहा है यार? Hello, 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 hello. Hello. Is someone online right now? Hello जय भाई. Hello अंश भाई. सॉरी लाइक मैं थोड़ा सा उस पर फोकस हो गया था, तो मेरा ध्यान हट गया था कि मेरे को चैट भी देखनी है. Hi Jay, you randomly popped on my would love to know more about your I didn't find any description about it. सिरिकर पूजा भाई, मैं अभी 23 ईयर्स का हूँ. मैंने अपना बीबीए अभी जस्ट ख़त्म किया है, बट क्योंकि मैंने मेरी केयरलेसनेस के कारण उसे एकदम रूइन कर दिया, मतलब बहुत ही ख़राब किया है. तो इस कारण से ना मुझे कोई अच्छी जॉब मिल रही है, ना ही मैं अब्रॉड जा पा रहा हूँ फॉर हायर एजुकेशन. तो अब मेरे को सिर्फ मेहनत का रास्ता बच चुका है. तो मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ अभी, नॉन स्टैक सीख रहा हूँ, मतलब कि फुल स्टैक वेब डेवलपमेंट सीख रहा हूँ. और मेरा गोल है कि 6 मंथ के अंदर अंदर एक अच्छी सी जॉब पा लूँ. तो हाँ, यही अभी मेरे बारे में. और इसके अलावा मतलब मैं इसके अलावा देखें तो मैं एक ट्रेडर हूँ, ठीक है. और हाँ, यही है. नलिश ऑपरेटर का यूज़ करके डिफ़ॉल्ट वैल्यू सेट कर दो. ओके ओके, फोर्क गेमिंग में रुक जाओ, मैं अभी ना सर्च कर रहा हूँ, पढ़ता हूँ मैं थोड़ा, फिर उसके बाद करता हूँ. यार ये ऑलरेडी है, बट मेरे को समझ नहीं आ रहा है कि इसका लॉजिक क्या है. लाइक क्यों ये वर्क कर रहा है लेकिन ये वर्क नहीं कर रहा है. मतलब मेरे को ये जानना है ना कि ये क्यों ये क्यों नहीं वर्क कर रहा है। भाई लाइट मोड बंद कर, आप शुभ रेडी है। ब्रो ये तो डार्क मोड ही है। तो अच्छा तुम इसका कह रहे हो, इसका मुझे नहीं पता। ब्रो मुझे भी चाहिए डार्क मोड वैसे अंदर का। अबे कहाँ कस्टमाइज है। अब सही होगा आई थिंक। इतना सिंपल यार, मैं मिस क्यों कर रहा हूँ। हमने इवेंट का यूज़ क्यों ही करा? हम डायरेक्ट ये भी तो कर सकते थे कि जो इनपुट में वैल्यू जा रही है उसको डायरेक्ट प्रिंट करा दो यार। अगर हम इवेंट डॉट की वाले उसमें चले जाएंगे, वैल्यू में तो चलो अनडिफाइंड आएगा, की वाले में चले जाएंगे तो वो तो जो की प्रेस कर रहे हैं वो दिख पाएगा ना। ये इतना सिंपल था यार, शिट इतना सिंपल था। हमें जो उसकी वैल्यू को एक्सेस करना था यार, आया तो था। शिट शिट। Venice, my laptop is very, I would say, low grade. Like it was just 40,000 rupees of laptop. It has like minimum base i3 processor. I think it has i3 10th gen with I don't know how many RAMs it has. Like I think it's 8 GB RAM. Guys, this was so easy यार, हमें वैल्यू निकालनी थी। यार अब मैं नहीं कर रहा, मेरे को आता है। इट वाज सो इजी। हमें सिर्फ और सिर्फ जो इनपुट था उसकी वैल्यू को डायरेक्टली नीचे दिखाना है। सो सिंपल। हम पता नहीं कहाँ इवेंट में चले गए। ठीक है, ऐड टू कार्ट करेंगे तो ये कर सकते हैं। कार्ट क्वांटिटी इज इक्वल्स टू, वो वन डाल दिया। करके देखते हैं। इसको भी डार्क बनाया जा सकता है क्या? हम्म हम देखो, एल्गोरिदम क्या हुआ कि सबसे पहले हम जब भी प्रेस करें, हम ये करना है हमें, हम्म, देखो, Venice, I don't have any suggestion, like only one suggestion: be consistent. ओके, सो लाइक हमें क्वेश्चन लिखना है, हमें ये दिखाना है कि जब भी हम जैसे शो क्वांटिटी करें तो वो वन आ जाए, ठीक है। ऐड टू कार्ट करें तो कार्ट क्वांटिटी वन आ जाए, कार्ट क्वांटिटी दो पे प्लस टू हो जाए। तो हम एक फंक्शन बना सकते हैं जिसमें, एक सेकेंड, ओके, सेट, इसको हम, अरे यार क्या हो रहा है, हमने सबसे पहले नंबर बना लिया, ये आइकन्स बना लिए। आफ्टर दैट व्हाट यू कैन डू इज कि अगर शो क्वांटिटी पे क्लिक करेंगे तो ऑन की का इस्तेमाल करते हैं। ठीक है, सबसे पहले ना इसको टैकल करते हैं, ऐड टू कार्ड और जो प्लस वन वाले और जो माइनस वाले। इसके लिए हम क्या कर सकते हैं कि जब भी एक वैल्यू सेट कर सकते हैं कि यदि भी ऐसा हो, लाइक यदि भी ऐड टू कार्ड हो तो ये जो वो है नंबर क्या कहते हैं, लेट्स से ऐड टू कार्ड है तो प्लस वन जो स्ट्रिंग है वो उसको जावास्क्रिप्ट में भेज दे, मतलब उस फंक्शन को भेज दे। वो फंक्शन क्या करे, उसको नंबर में चेंज कर दे, जो हमने नंबर फंक्शन पढ़ा था उसको यूज करके नंबर फंक्शन में चेंज कर दे, उसको किसी उसको चेंज कर दे। हम ये लगा सकते हैं प्लस वन, प्लस टू, प्लस थ्री, आई डोंट नो वर्क करेगा कि नहीं वर्क करेगा, तो हम इस तरीके से कर सकते हैं। नहीं यार, क्योंकि अगर नंबर में हम प्लस, एक सेकंड, इसमें भी मुझे कर ही जाएगा, क्या कर रहा है, एक सेकंड, क्वांटिटी इक्वल्स टू क्वांटिटी चेंज, ओके ओके। अगर ये तो हुआ कि अगर कार्ड क्वांटिटी इससे करो तो यार, नहीं यार, एक सेकंड रुको, मैं ना कुछ कॉन्सेप्ट्स भूल रहा हूँ। टाइप टाइप कन्वर्जन पढ़ा था हमने, एक सेकंड, क्या कहते हैं इसको, पैरामीटर। एनी टाइम रूल्स, यस जावास्क्रिप्ट कर रहा हूँ। वॉइस आ रही है, कैसा पॉसिबल नहीं है this just showed up on my feed, so I don't know your history, but just a session from SD. Focus more on shipping products than the coding part. Uh, like, okay, pages, I really appreciate, but can you elaborate it more? Like, I didn't quite understood. Like, if I don't know how to code, then how will I even ship a product? Vishal Raj, right now I am learning JavaScript. Also in JavaScript, I've done till DOM. Sorry, I've completed in HTML, CSS, JavaScript project till this part. And right now I am solving the questions which was there inside the DOM DOM part, or I would say DOM lesson. I'm doing that, and in the right now in the right now I'm solving question 99 wherein I have to display this. I was just searching something which I wasn't sure about. मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ यार, क्या कर रहा हूँ मैं? पागल आ गया मुझे। भाई मेरा दिमाग काम नहीं कर रहा है यार, क्या हो रहा है मेरे को? भाई मैं क्या हो रहा है, मैं एक सवाल पर अटक गया हूँ भाई।
Hey developers, join us for the biggest AI competition with over $10,000 in cash prizes. Yep, that's right, over $10,000 in cash prizes where you can showcase your
Okay, so we are at 9th J. In this, भाई वो कर रहा है बढ़िया वही जैसे नहीं आप अपनी लाइफ अपनी करें. Thank you so much, Shreyas. Thank you so much. Means a lot. Means a lot. Okay, so in this question, what we have to do is that like that calculator, like whenever we press any number, we have to print it up like other way, and like it's like we have to display what we are typing, what we are doing, right? We have to update it whenever we click anything on it, just like a calculator. So I know like the code because I have made this. So what it does is that it returns this string, and then yeah, he uses this. Okay, so when you click this, what it does is that we have okay, इस कैलकुलेशन क्या करेगा देखेगा कि कोई है कुछ है कि नहीं है. अगर लाइक कुछ नहीं होगा तो इसको एम्प्टी स्ट्रिंग दे देगा. what it will do here is that after updating everything, uh, no, it's the application. This application using this AI functionality perform that calculation, and then what it does is that it sends this information that local stores. And what we have to do now is mm, easy. So at the top, what we are going to do, what have to do. Right now I'm just going through the code and trying to form a structure and connect the parts together, like how different are connected. Oh, okay, okay. तो उसको कहीं कॉर्नर स्पेस पे रखे थे जहाँ से हम लोग बार बार यूज कर रहे हैं लोकल स्टोरेज, इसकी जगह उसको कॉल कर सकते हैं। ओके, तो हमें क्या करना है, सबसे पहले इसकी करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि एक सेकंड यार, मुझे ना कुछ डाउट आ रहा है। वर्क कॉलेज भाई करो भाई करो मेहनत करो भाई guys please like the stream please if you can नहीं ओके तो वो उसको अपडेट कर देगा इनर एचटीएमएल वर्सेस अच्छा हाँ इनर एचटीएमएल वो स्पेसेस को भी गिनता है तो टेक्स्ट के लिए ज़्यादा बेटर तो इनर टेक्स्ट ही रहता है लाइक अगर हम डायरेक्टली स्ट्रिंग करके कैलकुलेशन करेंगे वर्सेस नहीं अगर हम वो करेंगे तो डायरेक्ट कैलकुलेशन प्रिंट हो जाएगा अरे वेरिएबल कैलकुलेशन वेरिएबल है ना तो वेरिएबल के लिए हम ये वाला यूज़ करेंगे ओके आई थिंक वर्क करना चाहिए लेट्स चेक इट लेट्स डू वन थिंग फंक्शन कॉल तो कर रहे हैं लेकिन हमें फंक्शन के बाहर भी लिखना पड़ेगा यस 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 आई थिंक राइट है why doesn't it work? लिखा तो है. What? No, like I don't know, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. After JavaScript, I learn React and all, like, right? This is the standard roadmap, I think. Pravat, I think like it is important not to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then React and every, like, then you can decide like you want to learn first front end or back end, right? I don't know. Don't scare me, bro. फालतू का scare मत कर. Bro, like you are, I think, wrong here because see, if you don't have your base clear, you are like if you don't have a good clarity in JavaScript, you are not going to become good in React. So it's not. I don't agree with you. Like if you don't have a good understanding of the concepts in of CSS, then you are going to struggle in Tailwind, learning Tailwind, and yeah. So no, you. I don't think you are right. Many people do the same mistake that without even practicing like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, they start jumping to like frameworks and eventually fail. No, ये अपने आप कैलकुलेट क्यों कर रहा है यार, क्या प्रॉब्लम है. देखो, एक बार ना फिर से कैलकुलेट करके देखते हो क्यों कैलकुलेट कर रहा है अपने आप. 6 तो हमारा वो वाला काम तो कर रहा है, क्या कहते हैं. सी, बट जब हम ये क्लिक कर रहे हैं तो काम नहीं कर रहा है. यार मेरे को समझ नहीं आ रहा कि लाइक 1 + 2 करा। ब्रो करो करो। राहुल पांडे कुछ नहीं चल रहा है, बस वो करो प्रभात द्विवेदी। Bro, Vishal, see, the thing is, it's my first time, so I know that I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be, 100% efficient. I might do some mistakes, which I'll later realize it. But the problem is though that everybody, also in my course, uh, uh, like I have got two courses, and in that also they have given a step-by-step path. So I follow that. प्रभात द्विवेदी इग्नोर नहीं कर रहा, लेकिन तुमने आइडिया सही दिया, मैं अपने फ़ोन पे देख लिया करूँगा आज से। मतलब मैं अब जब लाऊंगा ना, भाई बात कैसे हो भाई, कैसे हो सब बढ़िया भाई, 6 मंथ्स चैलेंज। कोड, डोंट वेस्ट टाइम। कौन सा कोर्स? ये मैंने दो कोर्स खरीदे थे, एक था कोड एकेडमी, कोड एकेडमी का, और एक है कोड डैम का। दोनों घटिया हैं। कोड प्रखर अग्रवाल, यस सॉरी, आई वाज जस्ट replying to the chat. So guys, I am taking a break now. I am going to go washroom. So yeah, just a 10 minutes break and I'll be back. प्रभात आके दिखा दूंगा।
Bro, if you keep learning Python like this, you won't get anywhere, even by next year.
If you know a better way, why don't you just tell me and save me all this unnecessary trouble?
In this lesson, we're going to learn two more features of JavaScript called arrays and loops. And we're going to use these features to create this to-do list project. First, let's create a new file for this lesson. We'll go to our code editor and click up here to show our files. And this time, make sure you have one of these HTML files selected so we don't create the new file in one of these folders. So now we're going to click this icon to create a new file, and we're going to name this file 11-arrays-and-loops.html and press enter. Now let's copy the previous lesson into this file. So we'll click on 10 DOM projects, and we'll type here and type Control A or Command A to select the code, and then right-click, copy, and in here, right-click and paste. Now let's hide our files, and we'll prepare this file for this lesson. So we can scroll to the top, and we'll change the title to Arrays and Loops, and let's remove all of the CSS. And we'll also remove the HTML, which is right here. And we'll remove all the JavaScript. Now let's save, and we'll open this file in the browser by right-clicking, open with Live Server. And let's also open the console. So we'll right-click, click Inspect, and click the console. And now we can close the previous tab. And the previous code for now, until we just have the lesson 11 file. Now we're ready to learn arrays. An array is another type of value in JavaScript, and it represents a list of other values. So let's do an example and create our first array. We'll go into the script element, and we're going to type open square bracket and close square bracket. And inside the square brackets, we'll type a value like the number 10. And then we'll type comma and another value like the number 20, and then comma again, and a third value like the number 30. So this is an array, and it represents a list of three numbers, 10, 20, and 30. Now, arrays themselves are also values, which means we can save them in a variable. So at the front, we can create a variable using const, and let's name it my array, and we'll make it equal to this array, and we'll add a semicolon at the end. So now we created a list of values, and we saved this list in this variable. Let's create a new line, and we'll console.log my array, and save, and it will display the list of values in the console. So that's basically what an array is. It's a list of values. Now to get a specific value in an array, we can use square brackets. So let's create a new line, and we'll type my array and square brackets. Inside these brackets, we'll put a number like 0. This number represents the position in the array. So 0 means the first value. If we console.log this code and save, my array square bracket 0 gives us the first value, which is 10, and that's what's displayed in the console. Now if we change this to 1, this will get us the second value in the array, which is 20. If we save, it displays 20. So this number represents the position in the array. 0 is the first value, 1 is the second value. So let's create a new line. We'll type my array square brackets, and let's say we want to change the first value. So we'll type 0 for the first value, and we just make it equal to something else, like 99. Now if we console.log my array again and save, you can see that this changed the first value to 99. So that's basically how arrays work. We can access a value inside an array, and we can also change a value inside an array. Now that we understand the basics of arrays, let's learn the syntax rules. To create an array, we start with an open square bracket, and we end with a closed square bracket. Inside, we can put a list of values, and we separate each value with a comma. We can also write an array on multiple lines, like this. We just put the new lines after the comma. Now to get a value inside an array, we can use square brackets and a number, like 1. This number is called the index. It represents the position in the array that we want to get. So the first value is index 0, the second value is index 1, third value is index 2, and so on. Notice that the index starts as 0. This is called a zero-indexed array. Now, inside an array, we can put any type of value. For example, let's create a new line, and we'll create a new array using square brackets, and inside we can put the number 1 and then comma, and we can also put a string like hello, and another comma, and we can put a Boolean value like true, and another comma, and we can even put an object like curly brackets, name, colon, socks. Now, an array itself is also a value. That means we can save arrays in variables like this, or even save it in an array. For example, in this array, we can add an array inside, like 1, 2. Next, arrays have a weird behavior when we try to check the type of an array. So on a new line, let's type console.log type of, and then square brackets 1, 2, and save. This will tell us that an array is an object. And that's because an array is actually an object, but it's just a special type of object. If we want to check if something is specifically an array, we can use this code. Capital A array dot is. We want to check if something is an object. 1, 2, and dot log type of, and then square brackets 1, 2, and save. This will tell us that an array is an object. And that's because an array is actually an object, but it's just a special type of object. If we want to check if something is specifically an array, we can use this code. Capital A array dot is array brackets. And inside the brackets, we'll put an array like square brackets 1, 2. So this will check if this value is an array. If we console.log this result and save, it will display true.
Are you looking to start your own business? Well, look no further than busy.com. Right now, we'll complete your LLC filing free.
And finally, because arrays are just a type of object, they also have properties and methods we can use. So one useful property is called .length. So we'll type console.log methods we can use. So one useful property is called .length. So we'll type console.log my array.length. This will tell us how many values are in the array. So my array has 3 values. So if we save, it will display 3. Next, we'll learn a useful method of an array called .push. This adds a value to the end of the array. If we did my array.push 100, this will add 100 to the end of my array. If we console.log my array and save, you can see that 100 was added at the end. The last method we're going to learn for now is called .splice. This removes a value from an array. For example, my array.splice and brackets, and a splice takes 2 numbers. The first number is the index that we want to remove. So let's say we want to remove the first value, which is index 0. The second number we give to splice is the number of values we want to remove. If we give it 1, it will remove 1 value at index 0. If we give it 2, it will remove 2 values starting at index 0. So for now, let's just remove 1 value. And let's create a new line and console.log my array and save. You can see that splice removed the first value from the array, or index 0, which was 99. All right, now that we understand the basics of arrays and the syntax rules, let's do some practical examples. So I've prepared a project we can do for this lesson. We'll go to our browser, create a new tab at the top, and here we'll type supersimple.dev/projects/arrays and press enter. So this page contains the to-do list project we're going to create in this lesson. So down here is the final version of the project. We can type a name for our to-do, like make dinner, give it a due date, and then click add, and it will add it to our list. We can add another to-do, like wash dishes, and then select a due date, and click add again, and it will add another to-do to our list. And each to-do also has a delete button, so we can delete it when we're finished the task. So this is the final version of the project. And these two up here are simpler versions of the project that we're going to use to work our way up. So let's start with the first project up here. We're going to open our console by right-clicking, click Inspect, and click the console. And the way this first project works is we can type a to-do in this text box, like make dinner, and when we click add, it will add the to-do to an array and display it in the console. If we type another to-do, like wash dishes, and click add, it will add it to the array and display it in the console. So let's create this project. We'll start by creating a file for this project. We'll go to our code editor and click up here to show our files, and click this icon to create a file, and we'll name this 11-to-do-list.html and press enter. Now let's copy the code from arraysandloops.html. So we'll click here, Control A or Command A, and then right click, copy, and down here, right click and paste. And let's close this for now. We'll scroll up and change the title to to-do list and remove all the JavaScript code. And this time, instead of writing all the JavaScript in here, let's actually put the JavaScript in a separate file, which we learned in the previous lesson. So we'll open our files again, and this time we'll go to our scripts folder. We'll click this JS file, and we'll click this icon to add a new file to this folder. And let's name it 11-to-do-list.js and press enter. Next, we're going to load this file into our HTML file. So let's open this And in the script element, we can remove the spaces, and we're going to add an attribute called src equals, and we're going to load the JavaScript file that we just created, which is inside the scripts folder. So we'll type scripts, and then a slash to go into this folder, and we'll load the file 11-to-do-list.js and save. So now I'm going to drag this file down here so I can see both the HTML and JavaScript at the same time. Close this for now, and I can close the other code for now as well. And finally, let's open this in our browser. So we'll right-click, open with Live Server. And let's also open the console on this page. Right-click, click Inspect, and click the console. Now, one more thing I'm going to do for this video is I'll rearrange my windows so that we can have the final design at the bottom. Let's start by creating the HTML elements. Let's go to the body, and we'll actually create a paragraph element to start. Inside the paragraph, we'll put the text to-do list. Next, let's create the text box. So to create a text box, less than input, greater than, and we'll add a placeholder to this text box. Placeholder equals to-do name. Finally, let's add this button. So on a new line, let's type less than, button greater than, and inside the button, we'll have the text add. Now let's save, and this creates all the HTML elements that we need. Next, let's write our JavaScript. So first, we're going to create an array to store our to-dos. And then when we click the add button, we're going to get the text from the text box and add it to our array. And finally, we'll console.log the array. Now let's convert these steps into code. Let's create a new array first. Using const, let's name it to-do list, and we'll make it equal to square brackets. So this is an array with no values inside. We also call this an empty array. Next, when we click the button, let's get the value from the text box. So let's go to our button and add an onClick attribute. And then inside here, let's create a function for this. So down here, let's create a function. We'll name it add to-do, brackets and curly brackets. And then inside the onClick attribute, we're just going to call this function, add to-do and brackets. The next step is to get the text in the text box. We can do that using document.querySelector. So to use query selector, we're going to put a class on this input element. So we'll type the class attribute js-name-input, and then in here, document.querySelector, brackets and a string, and we'll type a dot to get a class, and we'll get this class, js-name-input. As a reminder, this gets an element with the class JS-name-input, which is this element, and puts it into our JavaScript. And now let's save this in a variable. So at the start, let's type const input element and make it equal to this result. So now we took this input and put it into our JavaScript. To get the text out, we're going to use a property of the input element called value.
I've been using Grammarly for 3 years, and I can't imagine my work life without it. Grammarly is an AI writing partner, and unlike other AI
element and puts it into our JavaScript. As a reminder, this gets an element, get this class, j-input, and then in here, document.querySelector, brackets and a string, and we'll type a dot to get a class, and we'll get this class, js-name-input. As a reminder, this gets an element with the class JS-name-input, which is this element, and puts it into our JavaScript. And now let's save this in a variable. So at the start, let's type const input element and make it equal to this result. So now we took this input and put it into our JavaScript. To get the text out, we're going to use a property of the input element called value. So down here, input element dot value. And let's save the value in the text box in a variable so we can use it later. At the front, const name, and we'll make it equal to whatever's in the text box. Before we continue, let's console.log the name to check if this is working. So let's save this JavaScript file, and let's also save this HTML file. We'll go to our browser, and I'll resize it so we can see the console. And now if we type something in the text box, like make dinner, and click add, it will get the text from the text box and then display it in the console. Okay, so it's looking good so far. The next step is to add this name to our to-do list. So we learned how to do this earlier. We can use a method called push. Push will add a value to the end of the array. So let's remove this for now. And at the bottom, we're going to type our array to-do list dot push brackets, and then between the brackets, we're going to add our name here. And now the last step is to console.log the entire array. Console.log to do list and save. Now let's give it a try. We'll type make dinner in the text box and click add. It will take this text, add it to the array, and then console.log the array. And now we have our to-do list. Let's add another to-do. We'll type wash dishes and click add. Again, it will get the text in the text box and then add it to the array. So now our array has 2 values, and then we display them in the console. So that's how we create this first version of the to-do list project. Now, one more feature we're going to create is if we add something to our to-do list and click add, it will reset the text box. To do that, let's go into our code and we'll create some new lines. And remember that the value property represents the text in the text box. So to change the text in the text box, we can simply change the value property. So we'll type input element dot value and change it to the empty string. So this will make the text in the text box become empty. If we save and now type something in the text box and click add, it will reset the text in the text box. Let's move on to the second version of the to-do list. So here, when we type something in the text box, like make dinner and click add, it will actually display it on the page. If we type something else like wash dishes and click add, it will also add it to the page. So how do we take our array and display each value on the page? To do this, we're going to learn another feature of JavaScript called loops. Loops let us run some code over and over, like a loop. So let's go back to our 11 arrays and loops file, and we can close this JavaScript file for now, and we're going to learn loops. So first, let's comment out the previous code by typing /star, and at the bottom, */. Let's go down, and we'll create our first loop. We'll start by creating a variable using the word let, and we'll name this variable I, and we'll make it equal to 1. Next, we're going to type the word while, and then brackets and curly brackets. And then inside these curly brackets, we're going to put some code that the computer will run over and over, just like a loop. Let's put the code console.log I. So this will display the variable I in the console over and over again. Now, obviously, we don't want to loop this forever. So how do we get this loop to stop? We can do that using the round brackets up here. Inside these round brackets, we're going to put some code that results in true or false. For example, we can check if I is less than or equal to 5. So the way this works is that if this code results in true, the loop will keep going over and over. Once this results in false, the loop will stop and it will go to the next line. Now you may notice that this code will never result in false because I is equal to 1 and 1 is always less than or equal to 5. So when does this actually become false and stop the loop? The answer is inside this loop, we're also going to update this variable I. So we'll type I and we'll make it equal to itself plus 1. So now every time we loop over this code, we're going to increase I by 1 and eventually I will be greater than 5. This will return false and it will stop the loop. If we save and then go back to the tab for this file, and I'll rearrange my windows so we can see the console, this loop makes the computer count from 1 to 5. So let's go over this code step by step to make sure we understand how it works. First, we create a variable I and we make it equal to 1. And then we do a loop. So if this condition is true, the computer will keep running this code over and over again. So the first time it loops I equals 1, and then it displays 1 in the console, and then we increase I to 2. Now we go back to the top, and we check this code. 2 is less than or equal to 5. This is true, so we're going to run this code again. This time I equals 2, and we display it in the console, and then we increase I to 3. And now 3 is still less than or equal to 5, so this is true, which means we keep running this code. And eventually, this is going to increase I to 6. Once I is 6, this will become false, which will cause the loop to stop, and then we go to the next line. So that's why it counts from 1 to 5, and then it stops at 5. So this is called a while loop. While this condition is true, it will keep running this code over and over again, just like a loop. As soon as this condition is false, it will stop the loop. All right, now that we understand how a while loop works, let's learn the syntax rules. To create a while loop, we type the word while, and then round brackets and curly brackets. The code inside the round brackets is called the loop condition. The code inside the curly brackets is called the loop body. The variable I at the top is called the loop variable. Every time we loop, we're going to increase the loop variable. This is known as the increment step. The increment step makes sure that the loop ends at some point. Without this increment step, the loop will just keep going forever. This is known as an infinite loop. Now remember that I equals I plus 1 has a shortcut. Instead of this, we can just do I plus equals 1. And remember, we actually have an even shorter shortcut for plus equals 1. Instead of this, we can also do I plus plus. So this will increase the value of I by 1 every time, just like before. So those are the three major parts of a loop: the loop variable, the loop condition, and the increment step. Now each time we run this loop, this is called an iteration. So in this loop, we did 5 iterations. We ran this code 5 times. And lastly, loops create a scope. Any variable that we create between these curly brackets will only exist inside the curly brackets. So that's a while loop. While this condition is true, it will keep running this code over and over again. Once this condition becomes false, it will stop the loop and go to the next line. So in JavaScript, there's actually 2 types of loops. The first type is a while loop, which we just learned. Now we're going to learn another type of loop called a for loop. To create a for loop, we'll create some new lines, and then down here, we'll type for, and brackets and curly brackets. Inside these brackets, we're going to type 3 pieces of code. The first piece of code is a loop variable, which is the same thing as this line up here. So we'll type let I equals 1, and then semicolon, space, and we'll type a second piece of code, which is the loop condition. So here, we'll type I less than equal to 5, and then semicolon and space, and the last piece of code is the increment step, which is this line right here. So we'll type I plus plus. And between these curly brackets, we'll write the code that we want to loop over and over. So let's just type the code console.log I and save. So this for loop does the same thing as the while loop above. It counts from 1 to 5. And if we look at this code, we can see that a for loop is just a shorter version of this while loop. Instead of writing the loop variable, condition, and increment step separately, we group all of them together at the top.
Hi, I'm Jared, and I use Bittrex 24 to manage projects because it gives me choice. Oh, a new project.
So this loop works the same way. First, we create a loop variable, and then as long as this loop condition is true, we will keep running this code over and over. And every time we run this code, we're also going to increase the loop variable by 1. So now that we learned 2 ways of doing a loop, which one should we use? If we're doing a standard loop, for example, it has a loop variable, a condition, and an increment step every time, it's recommended to use a for loop because a for loop is shorter and more organized than a while loop. However, if it's a non-standard loop, then it might be better to use a while loop. So what's an example of a non-standard loop? So let's say we want to generate random numbers until we get a number that's at least 0.5. To create this loop, we'll create a variable that will store the random number using let random number and make it equal to 0 to start, and then we'll do a while loop, brackets and curly brackets. Now inside the loop condition, we want to keep running this loop until random number is at least 0.5. So we'll check if random number is less than 0.5. Because if it is less than 0.5, we want to keep running this loop until we get a random number that's at least 0.5. And then inside this loop, we're going to generate a random number between 0 and 1, and then save it in the variable up here. So we'll type random number and make it equal to capital M math.random. So if this random number is less than 0.5, it will keep generating random numbers until we get a number that is at least 0.5. So at the bottom, if we console.log random number and save, it will give us a random number that's at least 0.5. So notice that this is a non-standard loop. It doesn't really have a loop variable that we increase every time, and it also doesn't have the increment step. So in this situation, when we have a non-standard loop, it's better to use a while loop because they're a bit more flexible. All right, now that we learned the basics of loops, let's do some practical examples. We're going to learn a technique called looping through an array. This means we're going to go through each value of an array one by one and do something with each value. So first, let's comment out the previous code using /* and */. At the bottom, let's create an array of strings. So we'll create a variable const to-do list equal to an array. And inside this array, we'll have the string make dinner, another string wash dishes, and another string watch YouTube. Now let's take each value in this array and display it in the console. To do that, we're going to run a loop, and this loop is going to count from 0 to the last index in the array. So remember that the index is the position of a value in the array. The first value is index 0, the second value is index 1, third value is index 2, and so on. So below this, let's type for brackets and curly brackets. Inside these brackets, we're going to create the loop variable. So here, we're going to count the indexes, let index equals 0, semicolon space, and we'll do the loop condition. So we'll keep looping as long as the index is less than or equal to the last index. So remember that the index starts from 0. This means that the last index in an array will be the number of values in the array minus 1, or the array.length minus 1. To do list.length minus 1. And here, we'll add another semicolon, and we'll add the increment step, which is index plus plus. So we'll increase it by 1 every time. Now, inside these curly brackets, we can do something for each index of this array. For now, let's just console.log this index and save. So this will count from 0 to 2, which is exactly all the indexes in this array. And now, using this index, we can also access the value at this index. So instead of just the index, here we can do to-do list, and then square brackets, and between the brackets, index. This will take whatever the index variable is and access that index in the array. So if the index variable is 0, this will access to-do list index 0, which is the first value. When the index is 1, it will access to-do list index 1, which is the second value, and so on. So for now, let's save the value in a variable using const value and make it equal to to-do list bracket index. And now let's console.log the value instead. If we save, this will loop through each index of the array, get the value at each index, and then display each value, which is what we see in the console. So this technique is called looping through an array. We use a loop to go through each value of an array, and then we can do something with each value. Now, I'm going to show you a few shortcuts we can use when looping through an array. Instead of checking if index is less than or equal to-do list.length minus 1, we can shorten this to index less than to-do list.length. So this check does the same thing as before. The loop will stop at index equals length minus 1, but it saves us some typing. Another shortcut is, instead of naming the loop variable index, we can shorten this to I. And we'll shorten this as well, and this as well. And that's why we often name the loop variable I. I means index. Next, we're going to learn a technique that we can combine with looping through an array, called the accumulator pattern. So first, let's comment out the previous code using /* and //. And at the bottom, let's say we have an array of numbers like this. How do we calculate the total of all the numbers in the array? Let's set up this problem. Let's say we have an array of numbers, const nums equals array, and then the numbers 1, 1, and 3. And we want to calculate the total of all the numbers in this array. To calculate the total, we'll learn the accumulator pattern. The first step of the accumulator pattern is to create a variable to store the result. So below this, let's create a variable const total, and we'll make it equal to 0. And the next step is to loop through this array and update the result. So down here, for brackets and curly brackets, and inside the round brackets, we'll create the loop variable let I, or index, equals 0, semicolon space, and we'll create the loop condition I less than nums.length, and then semicolon, and the increment step, I plus plus. So as we learned earlier, this loop will go through each index of this array. And now between these curly brackets, first, let's use the index to get each value. So we'll type nums, and then square brackets, and access the index I, and let's save this in a variable using const num equals this value.
Yep, that's right, over $10,000 in cash prizes where you can showcase your skills and creativity. Join us on Wednesday.
And finally, we're going to add each number to the total. We can type total and make it equal to itself plus each number. And remember, we have a shortcut for this, which is plus equals. And finally, since we're changing this total variable, we have to change from const to let. All right, so after this loop, we should have added each number in the array to the total. So at the bottom, let's console.log the total and save, and it will display 5, which is the exact total of all the numbers in this array. So that's the accumulator pattern. We first create a variable to store the result, and then we loop through the array and update the result. So notice that as we loop through the array, we're adding or accumulating the results into this variable. And that's why this is called the accumulator pattern. And we call this variable the accumulator variable. All right, let's do another example using the accumulator pattern. Let's say we're given this array of numbers again, and we want to create a copy of the array where each number is doubled. So if the array is 1, 1, 3, we're going to create a new array with 2, 2, 6. So at the bottom, we'll create some new lines and use the accumulator pattern. The first step is to create a variable to store the result. Let's type const, and let's name this nums doubled. And we'll make it equal to an array this time. So notice in the previous example, the accumulator variable was a number. In this example, the accumulator variable is an array. So we can use different types of values to accumulate the result. It all depends on the problem we're trying to solve. So now the next step is to loop through this array and update the result. At the bottom, we'll create a for loop, brackets and curly brackets. Inside the round brackets, we'll create the loop variable let I equals 0, and we'll create the loop condition I less than nums.length, and then the increment step I plus plus. And now between the curly brackets, we're going to get the number at each index. So const num equals nums square bracket I, and then we're going to update the result. So now here, we're going to add this number doubled to this array. So remember, to add a value to an array, we can use the method push. So we'll type nums doubled dot push brackets, and we're going to add to this array the number num multiplied by 2. And now at the bottom, let's console.log the result, nums doubled, and save. So this second loop will create an array where each number is doubled. So that's how we solve this example. All right, now that we understand how to loop through an array and the accumulator pattern, let's go back and we'll create the second version of our to-do list. So when we add something to the list, it will appear on the page. Let's go to our code editor, and we'll open 11todolist.html, and we're also going to open the JavaScript file. So it's this one, and for the video, I'm going to drag it to the bottom of my code editor so that I can see the files side by side. So I'll close this for now, and I'll rearrange my windows a bit. Let's open the tab for this project. So we'll review what we have so far. We can click in this text box and type a to-do, like make dinner, and click add, and it will add this to-do to this array, which is this array right here. We can type another to-do, like wash dishes, and click add, and it will add it to the end of the array. So now that we have this array of to-dos, we want to display it on the page. To do that, we're going to loop through this array, and we're going to create some HTML code for each to-do, and then put that code on the web page using the DOM. So first, let's loop through this array. To make this easier, let's make a copy of this array. So right-click, copy, and then here, we'll remove this and right-click and paste. So this will give us some default values to work with. So at the top, let's loop through this array using a for loop. So we'll type for, brackets and curly brackets, and then inside the round brackets, we're going to create the loop variable let I or index equal 0, semicolon, and the loop condition I less than to-do list dot length, semicolon, and then the increment step I plus plus. So this will loop through each index of this array. And then inside the curly brackets, let's get the string for each index. So we'll create a variable to save it, const to-do, and we'll make it equal to to-do list, square brackets, and I. And now for each to-do, we're going to create some HTML code. So we'll create a new line and create a variable const HTML and make it equal, and we'll create some HTML code using this to-do, using a template string. And then inside, we'll create a paragraph element. So less than p greater than, and then less than slash p greater than. Inside this paragraph, we're going to insert this to-do. So we'll type dollar and curly brackets and to-do. All right, so now we're looping through this array, and for each to-do, we create created some HTML code. And now we're going to combine all of this HTML code together and put it on the web page. To combine this HTML together, we're going to use the accumulator pattern. So at the top of the loop, we'll create a variable to store the result, let to-do list, capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the empty string at the start. And then as we loop through the array, we're going to add this HTML to the variable up here. So let's create a new line, and we'll do to-do list, capital HTML, plus equals HTML, to combine all of this HTML code together. So now after the loop, let's console.log to-do list HTML to see what we get. If we save, we took this array of strings, generated paragraph elements for each string, and then combined them all together. So now that we have all this HTML, we can put it on the page using the capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the empty string HTML code.
Want to know why some Python developers make 3x more than others? Regular Python developer 8 LPA, Python plus AI developer 25 LPA.
/p greater than. Inside this paragraph, we're going to insert this to do. So we'll type $ and curly brackets and to do. Inside this paragraph, we're going to insert this to do. So we'll type $ and curly brackets and to do. All right, so now we're looping through this array, and for each to do, we created some HTML code. And now we're going to combine all of this HTML code together and put it on the web page. To combine this HTML together, we're going to use the accumulator pattern. So at the top of the loop, we'll create a variable to store the result, let to do list capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the empty string at the start. And then as we loop through the array, we're going to add this HTML to the variable up here. So let's create a new line, and we'll do to do list capital HTML plus equals HTML to combine all of this HTML code together. So now after the loop, let's console.log to do list HTML to see what we get. If we save, we took this array of strings, generated paragraph elements for each string, and then combined them all together. So now that we have all this HTML, we can put it on the page using the DOM. So first, let's create an element where we can put this HTML. So inside the HTML file, after the button, we're going to create a different type of element called a div element. So we'll type less than div greater than. So the div element represents a container. Its purpose is to contain other elements inside, like paragraphs, buttons, and even other divs. So in this situation, we can't actually use a paragraph element because in HTML, paragraph elements for each string and then combine them all together. So now that we have all this, we took this array of strings, generated paragraph elements, capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the empty string at the start. And then now we're going to combine all of this HTML code together and put it on the web page. To combine this HTML together, we're going to use the accumulator pattern. So at the top of the loop, we'll create a variable to store the result, let to do list capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the empty string at the start. And then as we loop through the array, we're going to add this HTML to the variable up here. So let's create a new line, and we'll do to do list capital HTML plus equals HTML to combine all of this HTML code together. So now after the loop, let's console.log to do list HTML to see what we get. If we save, we took this array of strings, generated paragraph elements for each string, and then combined them all together. So now that we have all this HTML, we can put it on the page using the DOM. So first, let's create an element where we can put this HTML. So inside the HTML file, after the button, we're going to create a different type of element called a div element. So we'll type less than div greater than. So the div element represents a container. Its purpose is to contain other elements inside, like paragraphs, buttons, and even other divs. So in this situation, we can't actually use a paragraph element because in HTML, we cannot have a paragraph inside another paragraph. So that's why we have to use a div element here. For now, let's put some text inside this element so we can learn more about it. We'll type text and save. So like the paragraph element, the div element is a block element. That means it will take up an entire line by itself. And that's why it appears below the text box and the button. Now, one difference between a div and a paragraph is that a paragraph adds extra space above and below the paragraph, while a div does not add any extra space above or below. So it doesn't have any default styling. All right, so now that we learned the div, let's put this HTML code inside this div. First, we need to get this element into our JavaScript. And to do that, we'll add a class to this element, class equals js-to-do-list. And then down here, let's scroll down, and we'll put this div element inside our JavaScript. We can do that using document.querySelector, brackets and a string, and we'll type a dot to select a class, and we'll select the class js-to-do-list. So this will get this div element and put it inside our JavaScript. And then every HTML element has a property called .inner capital HTML, which controls the HTML inside this element. And now to put the to-do list HTML into this div element, we're going to make the inner HTML equal to the to-do list HTML. And now let's save this file and also save the HTML file. So this code will take the HTML that we created using the loop and put it into the div element. And that's how we make them show up on the page. So now let's try adding another to-do. We'll type watch YouTube and click add. And unfortunately, this new to-do doesn't show up on the page. And that's because when we click add, it will run this add to-do function and update the list. But we didn't actually update the HTML on the page. So to update the HTML, we need to run all this code again every time we add a to-do. So let's create a function for this code so we can reuse it. So at the top, we'll create a function, and let's name this render to-do list, brackets and curly brackets. So the word render means to display something on the page. So we'll put all of this code into this function. So we can delete this curly bracket, and then at the end, we'll type a closed curly bracket. And let's reformat this code by selecting these lines, and then press tab to add an indent. So now let's use this function. At the start, we'll display this to-do list on the page. So we'll call this function by typing render to-do list and brackets. And then let's scroll down. Every time we add a to-do to the list, we're also going to display the list again. So at the bottom, render to-do list and brackets again. So if we save, at the start, it will display the list on the page. And then if we add it to the list, like watch YouTube and click add, it will add it to the list and also display it on the page. So that's how we create the second version of the to-do list project. By the way, if we scroll up to the render to-do list function, this technique is called generating the HTML. Instead of writing all the HTML by hand up here, we looped through an array and we generated the HTML using JavaScript. Great.
3 years, 3 cities, for an experience like you've never had before. You want it all. Going to a top business school, learning about AI and data, getting exclusive internships.
So when creating websites with JavaScript, we usually follow a 3-step process. First, we save the data. In this case, we saved our data as an array. Next, we use the data to generate the HTML, which we did here. And finally, we make the website interactive, which we'll do later in this lesson. This is the main idea of JavaScript, and we follow this overall process when creating websites. The rock, paper, scissors project from the previous lessons was a bit different because all the HTML we needed was already there. We just had to modify it with JavaScript. So this process we're using for the to-do list is one step above what we did for rock, paper, scissors. We need to generate some HTML. And this is the standard process for creating websites. We're going to use this process for the to-do list and later the Amazon project, as well as websites that you build beyond this course. Let's take a break before continuing with the rest of this lesson. Here are some exercises that will help you practice what we learned so far.
As I'm taking a break, I'm feeling little exhausted now. I'm going to come after half an hour. So bye.